This is your philosopher instructor, Dr. Thomas, coming to you from Fuquay-Varina this evening. Hope everybody's doing well. Today, you can see our topic is first and second conjugations or verbs of the future tense and the imperfect tense. So we will be focusing on verb tenses, as well as some adjectives, which you will see are not that tricky because we do not do any English into Latin, but rather just recognizing the vocabulary will be successful for this grammar element. Let's take a look at the grammatica, the future and perfect tenses. We've talked quite a bit thus far, and we'll continue to do so, about Latin noun declensions, and how Latin nouns and adjectives have endings which determine its part of speech or its meaning in a sentence. And so it's important to note that nouns have declensions or parts of speech, but verbs have tenses. And we need to be able to distinguish between the two. So we've learned the osmos tisnit for the present tense back in chapter 1. Here you'll see we have a new set of endings which will need to be memorized. So for the future tense, we have bo, be, be, boo. And for the imperfect, we have the bombe, spant, bamos, bate, spant. You can see that that this is going to have to be learned and practiced, and then it'll be a little bit intuitive. As your book points out, there is a key vowel for the future tense, namely the letter I, which is not in all of the persons. In this case, not first person singular, but it is in the second person singular. It is in the third person singular. And then it is in the first person plural, second person plural, and of course, it is not in the third person plural. But that'll be helpful for being able to recognize it. The key vowel for the imperfect is the letter A. So think past tense, P-A-S-T. But ultimately, I think these just need to be memorized. So think bo, be, be, boo. Think of like a baby grows into his or her future, if that helps. And then the bombe, spant, bamos, bate, spant just is probably going to have to be memorized. Now, as your book points out, I'm just highlighting what the book points out. There's many ways to, or not many ways, but there's a couple ways to translate the imperfect. This is often our past continuous or past progressive in English. You're just going to have to sort of experiment with it. The important thing is to get it in the past tense and get the right person and number. So, for example, monebam is translated as I was advising, I kept advising, or I used to advise. Only the context will determine which one is the best, but for our purposes, the important thing is to get it in the past tense. So you wouldn't want to translate this as I am advising. That would be the wrong tense, so that would be wrong. Similarly, you wouldn't want to put it as I will advise. That also would be wrong because you would have it in the wrong tense. But you'll see that sometimes it may lead to stylistic issues about how to translate it. So definitely take a look at that. This is kind of what I was just mentioning earlier, that the future tends to bo, be, boo. And also the BA, the vowel A might associate it with a, past tense, I was, and that's sort of spelled out here. So we're going to go to translation. This is what I was talking about earlier. Here's a couple examples, kind of continuing the passage on friendship in the previous chapter by Cicero. De amico cogitabo, I will think about my friend. But here we have multam sapientiam habebunt, they will have much wisdom. And as it's pointed out here, that the imperfect in particular is something that indicates an action that was continuing or progressive. Think of it like a video. So if you can sort of imagine an action, because it is a verb, an action, as continuous or ongoing, we're probably going to want to use the imperfect tense, and they give you some sort of common descriptions of when to use that. Okay. Take a look at the examples. I know I'm going over this rather quickly because I think this chapter is pretty straightforward. The main thing is to obviously learn the vocabulary and learn the examples. As far as the concept, it's really quite simple. It's bo bi 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 boo for future tense and bam be spat bamos pate spant for imperfect. And then as long as we know the root of the word by studying our vocabulary and practicing our examples, we should know what the word means and how to translate it just based on those two concepts. Adjectives, I was mentioning earlier, is not too tricky as well, in particular because, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video tutorial, we do not go into Latin from English, and so the spelling or the declension endings are not too difficult because it's ultimately just vocabulary and context. Once again, this can seem, especially if you're new to Latin, this can seem a little bit complex. It really isn't. You'll see the patterns in due time. Okay, so here we have our vocabula. Remember, classical Latin didn't have a U, so sometimes that's what the V is here, but of course in English we would say it's pronounced like a U, vocabula. And you'll want to go to the Wheelock's website or use a Quizlet or whatever kind of study aid to learn these words, because these are words that are going to be potentially on the next test, as well as words that are in the examples. And as we said several times, words in parentheses, those are possible translations, whereas the words in parentheses, those are words in English that come from or are derived from the Latin. So we have a few more words in this chapter than we often do, but I think you'll go through and you'll find these words fairly straightforward, as well as the importance for English derivatives. Okay, so I want to go into the examples. Remember, I really strongly recommend, your book does as well, that your approach for every chapter should be to read through the chapter, and in particular, pay close attention to the examples, learn the vocabulary, then do the self-tutorial exercises for which you have the answers in the back of the book. Once you do that, you'll be in better position to do the sententia antiquae. Okay, so sort of keep that in mind. All right, so here we have unos invidiam populae Romani cres non sustinebis. So this one has some new vocabulary, but they give us invidia means dislike. That's where we get words like invidious and envious. You can see the root here, vid, and here we have vi, envious. And then sustinere, to sustain, sustenance. You need sustenance in order to have energy to work, for example, and also to endure. So this one we have dislike of people, Roman tomorrow, not you will sustain. So here we have a good example where the word order is closer to classical Latin. English, of course, we like to put the subject first. So let me go ahead and open up a document so we have that, so we can start doing that for us here. Let's see here. There we go. That we'll call this Latin 101, chapter 5. And we'll just call this number 1 for the sententia antiquae. So let's go back to the example and what we have here is that we're going to start with our subject and verb in our translation and then we'll actually start with an adverb first. Cres means tomorrow, like procrastination. Once again, if you're not sure, use a dictionary or simply look up the word. Don't forget the back of your Wheelocks also has a dictionary. tomorrow you will not endure the dislike of the Roman people. So let me go ahead and write that out here. Oops. Tomorrow you will not endure the dislike of the Roman people. All right, so make that maybe just a little bit larger so we can more easily see it here. Let's go back and look at the example here. So, kres means tomorrow, and then we have the negative adverb not, and then here's our subject and verb. So remember the bo be be boo, you can see here we have the bi, but it has the ending s. So this goes back to chapter 1. So this is second person singular. So if we go back and look at the examples, it's second person singular and it means you. And then so you will not, and then we can just follow one of these. You can say you will not sustain or you will not endure. So kres non sostenebis means you will not endure or you will not sustain. And then sustain what? Well, here's our direct object because it ends in am. Remember, the accusative is the direct object. And they tell us what it means. So you will not endure or sustain the dislike. But then we have populi Romani. Well, once again, Romani is second declension genitive singular. Remember, genitive means of. So we put all together and we're led to our example, tomorrow you will not endure the dislike of the Roman people. So here's a good example of how the word order really is quite different than English. Here we have the verb and subject in one word. Here we have a new tense. Here we have accusative direct object. Here we have genitive. So this is a fairly complex sentence for this stage of Latin. But once again, if you know your vocabulary and you remember what we've done so far, you can work your way through it by using your charts and other information that we've talked about and you've learned thus far. Duo. Periculum ne igitur here remanebant. So here we have another saying by Cicero. Remember, Cicero wrote more about ancient Rome than any other author. That's why a lot of these are from Cicero. So this one, here we have remanebant. So that's our bombe spat bamos pates bant. So here's third person singular. Of course, this is where we get the word remain. Nice thing the Wheelock does is everything's very logical to make connections. Well, here we have an adverb being tomorrow. Herri means what? That's right, yesterday. That's where we get words like heritage, which is another word for tradition. So we could say, yesterday was remaining, therefore the danger. This one's a little bit abstract. I'm going to go ahead and write out a possible translation, then I will explain it. So, was the danger remaining therefore yesterday? Notice that was the danger remaining therefore yet. Notice that it doesn't like this grammar, but that's just because it doesn't understand Latin. And so I'm going to try to explain this one. Is the nay is used for yes/no questions. That's why we have a question mark. So it's kind of a rhetorical question, like you saw it, didn't you? And we sort of ask a question. So this is called the enclitic. Once again, we don't have this notion in English, but you can sort of see that, well, this doesn't help us too much here, but this is called the enclitic, used for yes/no questions. But then periculum is the word for danger in Latin. And the context here could be either singular, or either nominative or accusative. It's probably the subject here based on the context. We would need a little bit more context, but we can say it probably is as the subject. So was the danger remaining? That's periculum ne rimanebat. And then igator means therefore, and then heri means yesterday. So adverbs don't have declensions or endings. And so basically what it means is, remember, Cicero was living during the time of the Roman civil wars, which ultimately led to the rise of Julius Caesar and his assassination. And for Cicero, for many, many years, had warned Romans about the fall of the Republic. And so these things just don't happen overnight, but there were conspiracies and all kinds of dangers during Cicero's life that in vain nobody seemed to listen, at least not in the sense that he was arguing for. So that's sort of the sense there, is that, don't be surprised by what's going on today, because if you had been paying attention, or if you wanted to pay attention, so Cicero, like Plato before him, suggests that people just aren't paying attention because they're concerned with their own lives, and whereas part of what it means to be rational is to be concerned and responsible for the world around you, not just your own house, but the house of Rome. And we put it all together, the sentence makes perfect sense, although the Latin sometimes doesn't translate readily into English. So was remaining is remanebant, and then we talked about these other words here. Okay, tres, angustus animus pecuniam amat. So here we have quite a bit of help here. And what do we have here? A narrow mind loves money. So let me write that here. A narrow mind loves money. This one is fairly straightforward. This one's not too difficult. This one is just angustus animus, which tells us it is the nominative subject ending in us. And we've had the word amat before, which is third person singular present tense. So here they gave us future tense. Here we had imperfect or past tense. Here we just have present tense. Already we've introduced 3 tenses. And then pecuniam we've had before. It is the accusative direct object ending in am. So a narrow mind loves money. What would a broad mind love? Seems to be suggestion. Well, how about virtue? How about the gods? How about justice and other things that go beyond biological self-preservation? All right, so that is that right there. Notice that is where we get words like anguish and anxious. Of course, in our own tradition, writers like Emerson and Thoreau argue about the rise of modern materialism and how it affects American individualism. All right, number 4, quatuor, supere animos et iram tuam by Ovid, the great Latin poet and writer. So supera is, this is we may have to look this up, but this actually is in the imperative. Again, only the context will give you that, but it can mean overcome, conquer. Of course, it's where we get words like Superman. So overcome or conquer probably is going to be the best way to read that. So conquer your animos et iram. So conquer your minds and anger. Now, animus can also have many different meanings. Could be mind, intellect, soul, feelings, heart, spirit, courage, pride. So maybe pride might make more sense in this context. Again, without looking at the original context, it's kind of hard to say, but I think I'm going to go with that one just based on the context. So overcome your pride and anger. So again, in the context of living a life of true love. It needs to get beyond selfishness in some sense. So here we have the imperative going back to chapter 1. And then here, this is kind of interesting because we have the second declension accusative plural, os, which tells us it is the direct object. But then we have iram, which is first declension singular. Again, that's just how Latin works in terms of English. We say pride and anger. Anger doesn't seem to have any particular number. But here it's in the plural and the singular just because that's how Latin works. Now the tuam is your, that's a possessive adjective. And so we have to put it all together and we're left with that. What's tricky about this one, so already in the first 4, to kind of highlight the challenge in this chapter, is you have a variety of verbs. I think I've said in a previous video, the Latin noun declensions are really what you ought to focus on. The verbs, in my experience, can take a little bit longer to fully conceptualize. We don't have a simple chart like we do for Latin noun declensions for Latin verbs. And so if you look in the back of the book, you'll see some charts on verb forms, and you'll discover very quickly that the verbs in Latin are a little bit harder to summarize in a neat picture or format. And so ultimately, they're just going to have to be learned with practice and vocabulary, and as we're doing now. So, but I think that's the challenge in this chapter. We have future tense, we have past tense, we have present tense, we have the imperative. So already we have a variety of verb forms in play in Latin 101. And once again, this is where Latin is different than a modern language. You wouldn't have this variety of verb forms maybe at the end of a 102 modern language class, perhaps, or certainly at some point in the 102. But already in the middle of 101, you can see you have a lot more grammar in play. All right, quinque, culpa mea o amici. Culpa means blame, like mea culpa, culpability. And say, oh, my friends, the blame is mine. In other words, it is my fault. So the blame, it is my fault. Oh, my friends. So let's put that up here. So, oh, my friends, the blame or the fault is mine. Again, that's you could also say, so literally the blame is mine, oh, my friends. So here we have culpa ending in a, agreeing with mea. Here we just have the simple present verb is. And so this one is fairly straightforward. Again, another example of Cicero's rhetoric to persuade his fellow Romans that he himself is not free from Rome's decline in terms of the Republic. Okay, sex here. Da veniam filio et filiabus nostris. So here we have Terence, a writer of comedy. Although we don't have a larger context here. So da means give. So here we have another imperative going back to chapter 1. Again, if we don't know this, we're going to have to look it up. But here you can see present active imperative second person singular. So do dare dati datus. We've had this verb before. We mentioned it. It's where we get the word data. So, but we have to be able to recognize it as the imperative. And then so it means give. And then give favor, and then to our son and daughters. So let me write that out and then I'll explain it in further detail. So give favor to our son and daughters. So here we have give. And then veniam, you can see we've had this a couple times already. It's the first declension accusative singular, am. And then we mentioned before that for the dative means to or for whom something is done. So here we have filio ending in o because second declension dative singular is o. So give favor to our son. Now, how do we know it's our? Because nostris means our. So again, if you're not sure, you'll have to look that up in your dictionary or Whitaker's Words. This one's a little bit trickier once again because here we have kind of a unique ending, filiabus. Turn that off there. So filiabus means daughters. So, and again, if we're not sure, we just have to, you know, I think one of the virtues of Latin I've said before is kind of taking your time, not rushing through things. But here it's the dative plural, and so we don't want daughter, we want daughters because that's what the P means in the workers' words. All right, so give favor to our son and daughters. What does that even mean? Well, family was very important as it is today for the Romans, but especially for the Romans because the family had a political meaning that's different from private lives of modern democracies. All right, number septem, propter adolescentiam filii mei mala vitae non veribatis. What does that mean? It means propter means because or on account of, and it's always followed by the accusative. So, on account of adolescence, my sons, you were not seeing literally the evils of life. In other words, you had bad judgment. And so because of adolescence, my sons, you were not seeing. Notice how in English we probably say you didn't see. But did not see, that's the simple past, which believe it or not, Latin was you were not seeing is actually a better translation, although it doesn't work grammatically. Why? Because the idea here is you didn't just see it one time or not see it one time. It was right in front of you the entire time, but you kept messing around and everybody could see that you were acting like a bunch of clowns to kind of exaggerate this rhetoric. And sure enough, because you were being silly, you broke the vase or whatever like that. So that's sort of the sense. It's kind of an ongoing act, in this case, of not seeing. So that's why we use ing to indicate like a video that it's an ongoing action, as your book points out earlier. So because of adolescence, my sons, you were not seeing the evils of life. So let me write that here. And I tend to keep it pretty much because of, let me write it out here, my sons, you were not seeing the evils of life. So I tend to keep it rather literal. Again, we're not publishing this for Princeton University, so we don't need to worry too much about the English. So it's just easier to teach and learn, keeping it literal. Styles a little bit differently, different subject if you think about it. So propter means because of adolescence. And then my sons, so notice my sons is second declension nominative plural. So that's why we're putting in the plural, my sons. There's the letter I. And then tis is second person plural, so it agrees with my sons, right? So you all were not seeing, so the father or mother talking to his or her sons. And then mala is a neuter noun, and so we had neuter nouns in a previous chapter, and second declension neuter accusative plural is the letter A, so that's where it's mala. But then of life is first declension genitive singular. So these sentences are pretty simple, but the grammar has kind of gone up another notch. Let's be honest, for some of you, you're probably just going to have to memorize these. So this is not that difficult. There's not many words here. But the nice thing about Latin, I'll say it again, you keep going over the same grammar points over and over again. But it's going to take a while to get used to, kind of navigating through the different endings and the different tenses, and this is part of learning. All right, so octo, amibote. Remember, amibote means please. We had that in the previous chapter. Please take care of my daughter. So let me write that out here. So please take care of my daughter. So amibote literally means I will love you, but it's translated idiomatically as please. And we don't, so just amebote means please. And then cure is where we get the word, here it is, but here we're also using it in the imperative. So again, if we're not sure about this, right, seeing is believing. So, well, this doesn't help us too much because it has, well, it does, but it has the noun forms too. But we have to be able to recognize based on the context that it's present, active, imperative, second person singular. But only the context will tell you that. So please take care of my daughter. Cicero had a beloved daughter. What did he mean by that? Well, he was executed by Mark Antony. And so one of his last words were, please take care of my daughter. He was talking to his friends when he knew that his fate was sealed. So filiam meam, we go here. You can see that's accusative singular. So that tells us that daughter is the direct object. Okay, well, just got a couple more here. Vita humana est supplicium, excuse me. And this is Seneca, the Stoic writer. So human life is suffering, or human life is punishment. So let me write that down here. Human life is punishment. What does that mean? Well, Stoicism is a kind of moralism. It doesn't seem that human beings are capable of learning much from history. It seems like they keep making the same mistakes over and over again. And it's a little bit irrational. It's difficult to see. And it's painful to see. And so that's sort of the idea there in simplified form. This one's fairly straightforward grammatically. Vita humana, that just ends in A, so we need a subject. So human life, Latin likes to put the adjective after the noun. We talked about that before. So human life. S just means is, and then supplicium, they give us that right here, it means punishment. So we put it all together, human life is punishment. All right, let's see, one more here. We'll just do 1 through 10. So here we have another enclitics. This is a good one to end on. Satis ne sanos es. The ne, again, asks yes, no questions. And then here it says, are you sane enough? Now, sanos can also mean healthy. It's where we get the word sanity. So it's one of those where you have to kind of look at the context. Could mean sound, healthy, sensible, sober, sane. So we don't have the context. But of course, really doesn't matter. Well, it does, but I think we're just going to choose one. So are you probably healthy enough? Sane seems too philosophical for Terence, who was kind of a comedian, so we'll go with health. And so are you healthy enough? So maybe this person is doing a lot of drinking, as is often the case in Terence's plays, and so maybe he's, kind of ironically, is that the reason he's sick all the time is one of the characters in his plays is doing just the opposite to be sanos, and that's why he's insanos, or insane, or unhealthy. All right, so we went over those, and so we're almost done here. Here we're going to go Thermopylae, a soldier's humor. So we'll skip the short reading by Marshall. And you can see here, this was, this particular scene you might recognize if you've seen the movie 300, about the Spartans and the Persians. They give you a little context here. But if you were to look at, if we were in the classroom, I would show you that video clip, and you'll see that the main actor, I forget what his name is, Geraldo, or doesn't come to me in a second, but the movie 300 is, he uses this language almost verbatim, even in the trailer of the movie 300. So I'm going to go over this one here, and again, you always want to read it aloud, and they give you quite a bit of vocab down here, as well as a little bit of context. So, exercitus noster est magnus, persicus inquit, et propter numerum sagittarum nostrum arum caelum non veribitis. Tum lace daemonius respondit in umbre igitur pone pugne bimus, et Leonidas rex Lacedaemoniorum exclamat pugnate cum animis, lace daemonii hodie apud inferos fortasse cenibimus. So this one's a little bit longer, but we just got to work through the vocab here. So exercitus means army. So our army is large. So our army is large. A Persian said. So inquit means said, or in this case says. A Persian says. And because, or on account of, because of the number of our arrows, you will not see the sky. So, as you know, the Persian army was very large. There's only 300 of them. And he's saying you need to surrender now, or we will rain down on you and your men a storm of arrows. So our army is large, a Persian says, and because of the number of our arrows. So this is where propter is followed by the accusative. So numerum is second declension accusative singular. But then we have first declension genitive plural, which is arum. And so we have to be able to make that transition in our translation to because of the number of our arrows. But then here's the subject and verb. Tis is second person plural. And then bobibibibu is future tense. You will not see. And then see what? The kailum, which is second declension accusative singular. Then Lacedaemonius, who is the leader, a Spartan, responds, in umbre igitur pugnebimus, which means, therefore, we will fight to the death. So umbre literally means to the shades, but in this case, it means fight to the death and to Hades, right? So literally into the shade, therefore we will fight, but we will fight to the death. In other words, we are not surrendering. So what's important here, among other things, is the bobibibibu, which tells us it's future tense, but then mus means we, and then here we just probably have to follow the vocab down here. And Leonidas, the king of the Spartans, shouts, fight with courage, Spartans. Today, among the dead, perhaps we will dine. So again, we probably have to go down here and use some of this vocab here to help us with this. But so fight with courage. I think the book points out with minds doesn't make a lot of sense based on the context. So fight with courage, Spartans, today, hodie. So notice in this chapter we had yesterday, heri, we had tomorrow, kres, here we have today. So 3 different adverbs of time. So today, among the dead, perhaps we will dine. So apud is a preposition, it means among. And then here, inferos, among the dead. And then fortasse means perhaps. But then here we have bobibibibibu, and it means we will die. In other words, that we may die, but at least we'll die courageously and fighting and dying like Spartans. And then here, as you think about, when you have always a short essay question on your tests, you can read that. That might be a possible analysis for you. Okay, so that was somewhat quick, but again, you can always pause and go back and look at particular examples. The key, once again, is to keep practicing. Ultimately, you just got to get comfortable with the endings and learning vocab. If not, look it up, and then practicing the examples. And then I can't stress enough, if you do the self-tutorial exercises for which you have the answers, everything we just did is going to be a lot easier. Okay, so you have a crossword puzzle as homework. Next week, we do chapter 6. which is on I am and I am able or I can. And then we have what's called the complementary infinitive, as you see, is not too difficult. After next week, you will have another test on chapters 4, 5, and 6. So sort of keep that in mind. Plan on your next test probably the week after next. But we'll announce it. You'll have time to prepare and know what day and date that's going to be on. All right, as always, you can email me. You can come by my German class. Of course, not this Thursday because we have fall break, but feel free to stop by or email me. Probably easier in person if I'm being honest, but I'm happy to explain anything that is unclear. All right, valete omnes.